Hey everybody, this is Pie in the Sky using Wavefront to analyze Pi-hole data. My name is Nick Korte. I'm a solution engineer with VMware. This Pi is not actually the Pi we're going to talk about, but I used to be a former math teacher and couldn't help it. So this screenshot you see here is the popular interface of Pi-hole, an ad blocker that many of us have on our home networks. In my network, it's running on my Raspberry Pi at the house. You can see I have 15 clients, a lot of queries, good percentage of blockage here. And from this data, I can get a little bit of insight in the charts. How many queries over the last 24 hours, how many things were blocked. Notice it's in 10-minute intervals, 10-minute totals here. Same thing down there in the clients over time. How many queries per client? That's pretty good visibility, pretty good analytics on your home network. What if I want to customize that particular data analytics window? I can do that. Here's a 2-day snapshot. So what I found was that Pi-hole was pretty good, but there's something that's better. So this chart right here is a chart that I made from Wavefront metrics. I used the logs from Pi-hole, sent them to my Wavefront instance, and pulled out the total query count per device, as you can see here. But I actually looked at the rate of change over time, making 0 the start of my interval wherever I want it to be, however small, however large. I get some excellent visibility here. And notice that timestamp, 3:50 with 39 seconds. I can check out what the counts are at any given second. Okay, let's take that a step further. What if I want to see the difference in the rate of change of query count per device between today at this time and 24 hours ago? Maybe my daughter watches heavy Netflix on Saturday, but she doesn't do that on Monday. Some pretty interesting trends that you can gather here that Pi-hole just wasn't going to give you. But you know what? Maybe we should back up and talk about how this happened. How did I get to tinkering with Wavefront? Well, a lot of these things happen from nerdy conversations, right? I was talking to a friend of mine, this handsome devil, Aaron Bolthouse, and he was telling me about this cool thing called Pi-hole that he used on his home network. And I said, okay, how do you do that, Aaron? He said he was running it on a Raspberry Pi. So he told me what to get. I bought the kit, installed it, set it as my DHCP server, no problem. I was able to get that first page of analytics that you saw without too much trouble, maybe a little bit of customization. And we even talked about, oh man, wouldn't it be cool since we work for VMware to send the logs from that to Log Insight? Yeah, it would be, but there wasn't really an easy way to do that. But there's this Wavefront thing, one of the coolest products I think that we have. It's all in the cloud, man. It's a SaaS service. You don't really need infrastructure to run it unless you want to do certain things. So I wanted to learn that, but the question was, how do I get data from Pi-hole into Wavefront? It turned out to be a few more steps than I thought. So Wavefront, real quick, is a time series metrics analysis engine. Okay, things that change over time. I can make a counter, something that steps up over time. It's either going to increase or decrease. A gauge, a specific value, like a latency value of something over time. A histogram. Wavefront is built for massive amounts of metrics to be ingested even per second. If you ever look at your Pi-hole logs, you'll see that a number of queries happen in the same second even. So histograms can give you a distribution of that high volume data over time. A delta counter, if you're absorbing many different points per second, you can aggregate all those together and get an average or a median or a mean. Traces and spans are more for troubleshooting distributed applications, API calls that affect different services. That's just an idea. And there's no data rollup. Like in VROPS, you have data rollup over time. I get all the data I want. I can choose to roll it up with special functions. Again, how do I get there? How do I get the data in? Well, there's no integration with Pi-hole. And what I mean by that is no one has set up special dashboards specifically for Pi-hole data. There's no fast way to just turn on the synchronization between Pi-hole and Wavefront. So I had to build that from the ground up. There are a couple different paths for metric integration. I can send it directly to my Wavefront instance in the cloud, maybe through some API calls, but that's only the Wavefront data format. But if I use a proxy, which is usually a virtual machine that runs Ubuntu, Windows, could be Mac, could even run in a container, I can use different formats. And I can send logs. Well, I can find the Pi-hole logs just in Raspbian, no problem, so maybe I'll try that. Well, I needed to ship the logs, and I didn't know how to do that because I don't do a lot of Linux work. So there are a couple different supported methods to ship my logs to Wavefront. I can use FileBeat, that's a popular log shipper, but you know what? Nobody developed it for ARM, so people had custom compiled it. I didn't want to go there. But you can also send your raw TCP logs. Okay, cool. I could use this free tool from Splunk, but you have to sign up for it. Our syslog actually comes with Raspbian, but after reading through the Linux man pages like a nerd, syslog ng seemed like the way to go. But all those metrics I talked about before, if you're going to pull metrics out of logs, there are only 3 metrics supported today with Wavefront. That's counters, gauges, and histograms. And based on the Pi-hole data, those are fine. But where do I put the proxy? I don't have that many devices at my house. I'm not going to run a Wavefront proxy on my daughter's iPad. Maybe I put it on the Raspberry Pi. Not supported. Maybe I put it on my wife's computer. She has a Windows box. That's probably not a good idea. Don't want to be messing with her stuff. So when you run into problems like this, what do? You ask somebody that knows. Well, there's this guy named Bill Roth who worked heavily with Wavefront after we acquired them and before. He said, hey man, why don't you put your proxy in AWS EC2? Well, cool. Now I don't only get to learn Wavefront, I get to learn AWS and something else. So it didn't cost me any money yet. Here's my to-do list. The first thing I did was deploy the proxy. I deployed a Ubuntu VM in EC2. That's not too bad. Had to set up the security rules so I could access it from my house. I had to install the Wavefront proxy service, which is a simple app to get in Ubuntu. I also had to synchronize it with the Wavefront instance I was using. So that's 3 different places I had to go already. I had to ship the logs. Remember, this Raspberry Pi is running on my home network. I'm pulling the log file, pi-hole.log, from Raspbian. I had to configure syslog ng to send it up to my Wavefront proxy. But I also had to tell the proxy, hey, you're getting these TCP logs, so open up that port. Can't forget that. And then, how do I even know that the logs are getting there? It's one thing for me to send them somewhere, but if they're not getting there, I don't need metrics because I'm not going to get anything. So I had to make sure the path was clear in terms of AWS networking, the Ubuntu firewall here, the proxy configuration, and that Wavefront was actually seeing it. So check this out. This is actually a chart from Wavefront of my proxy, and it says that it's getting raw logs from my proxy. So they're being sent to the proxy, and it's telling Wavefront, oh yeah, you're getting logs. But I'm not doing anything with them yet. I have no metrics at this point. It's a little bit small, but hopefully you can see a little snippet of the Pi-hole logs. A lot of different things happening, queries, cache hits, replies, all those things. I had to use something called Grok Patterns. And a Grok pattern is simply a data format description. I have to find a pattern that matches the unique type of line I want to count or take data from. For example, this query line here, it fits a specific format. So every time that line comes up, if I make my pattern unique so that it matches that format, I can create a metric based on that type of line. But I have to know what the logs look like because the patterns are whatever I want to make them. It's kind of a choose your own adventure. Measure what you want. I had some ideas for metrics. Some of the ideas came from looking at the Pi-hole. Others, how long are DNS queries taking? Maybe that's a cool one to explore. Here's an example. One log line from Pi-hole's log file is at the top there, and then there's my Grok pattern. So everything inside the curly braces is a Grok pattern. If you want, you can go online and look at the open source definitions of these Grok patterns, and it's enough to give you a headache at times. But I can take words, I can take numbers, I can take an IP address. It will pull an IP address out of a log line, whether it's IP6, IP4. The formatting is already there. I'm just saying pull that out of this particular log line for me. So these words after the colon, those are really just IDs. Think of them as field names that contain data after the pattern is applied. So I wanted to capture interesting information from each log line so that I can use it as a metric. What if I could count the number of queries per IP address on my network? I need that information so I can do the group by and the analytics in the interface. And there's actually a really nice Grok debugger online that I used to make sure that my syntax was right. Because as you know, if your syntax is wrong, you're in some trouble. Here's an example. On the Wavefront proxy itself, you actually have to configure a file that has all your Grok patterns in it. We talked about the type of metrics supported. One of them is a counter. And in this chart below, I used a counter metric called query count-total. That's that second one. I've got the host name as device address. So every one of these lines in this period, starting from 0, is a different host on my network that's making queries. I'm gonna guess that my work computer is probably the one on top, because sometimes I like to work in the evenings. That first particular pattern that you got up there is, notice that inside the metric name, I used the device address. So that makes a metric for every single device address on the network. And this is just the beginning. I can do all kinds of other things with Wavefront and the analysis thereof, but it's based on whatever metrics I want to feed it. So what will I do next? Maybe I'll make some dashboards for Pi-hole or create an integration. That's probably not really popular because not many of us are using Pi-hole in our enterprises. Maybe some automation, maybe a little bit about the Wavefront query language. A lot of supplemental information out there, a lot of documents you can read. And I actually blogged about this step by step as I went through it. I'm not finished with all of them yet, but I want to keep going because I have to say I learned a ton from this little nerdy experiment. So if you want to talk about it, feel free to contact me. Otherwise, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.